Grade 12 Economics, please welcome Mr. Mhlomo. I'm here with you today to take you on microeconomics. Under microeconomics, we are doing the market failure. Then the subtopic in there, we are tackling the consequences for market failure. So please join me. Let's see what we have for you here. So these are the lesson objectives that will be achieved during the course of this lesson. So the lesson will assist you to, you will be able to compare allocative and productive inefficiencies with the aid of the graph, which is PPC. The lesson will allow you to be able to describe positive and negative externalities with the aid of graphs, well-labeled and explained graphs. The lesson will also allow you to discuss in detail state intervention as a consequence of market failure with the aid of relevant graphs. You will also be able to answer typical examination question papers or past examination question papers based on the consequence of market failure. Then we will make a sample of an essay cited from one of previous question papers to show you how is it outlined, and also how should you respond to the given essay if ever it comes in that nature. It is believed that you already know the following because it's been covered on our previous lessons. Reasons for the market failure are well known, they've been covered. The cost and benefit analysis have been covered. This is the body of the lesson, the consequences of market failure. So if we talk about the consequences of market failure, we talk about the effects of market failure, that after the market failure has happened or has occurred, what happens then? So more details will be given. So the first one is inefficiencies. So if the market failure has occurred, we come across inefficiencies that can be divided into three. We have allocative inefficiency, the productive or technical inefficiency, as well as Pareto inefficiency. So inefficiencies occurs if goods and services are not made available at the right time, right quantity, and right quality. So an inefficiency will prevail if goods are not made available in the market or to consumers at the right time where consumers need them, and then at the right quantity based on the number. If consumers are in need of 200 quantity of those particular goods, they must be supplied. But if ever they're not made available at the right quantity, there is a problem or inefficiency. And then if the quality is compromised, again, that also result to inefficiency. So businesses produce at the higher cost while there is a room to produce at the lower cost. So if ever businesses are using the higher cost, the expensive production methods, then that will result to inefficiencies because there is still a room for them to produce at the lower cost. So inefficiencies simply prevail if they produce or they use expensive inputs while there are also available cheap inputs to produce the same quality of goods and services. Then when inefficiencies occur, consumers pay too high price for goods and services that are, as a result of imperfect market. So whenever we come across the issue of inefficiencies, consumers find themselves paying higher prices for goods and services that are produced or supplied by the market, especially under the imperfect markets. Inefficiencies can be allocative or productive. Remember, productive inefficiency is also known as a technical inefficiency. And then explaining allocative inefficiency. In a simple term, it's more about misusing or misallocating resources, not using resources at their optimum level. Given a particular resource or given an amount of money to spend on producing goods and services, but maybe the producer will spend less on that. That is known as allocative inefficiency. Also, whenever the mixture of the product is not good enough, does not make use of all available resources to give the desired output and the desired taste, that result to the that is known as the allocative inefficiency, which always lead to productive inefficiency. Allocative inefficiency means that the quantities of goods or services produced are not what best for consumers. So goods that are made available in the market are not what consumers are really in need of, are not what is desired by consumers, especially maybe in terms of quality, taste, or the quantity. This means that the product mix does not reflect consumer taste, and therefore resources are not allocated in a right proportion. So if ever there is this wrong mixture of the products, so the consumer taste is not well reflected. As a result, that is known as allocative inefficiency. Resources were not integrated very well or were not mixed in a good manner to produce the good quality of the product that is desired by the consumer. So the consumer taste is compromised and is not well reflected by what is being produced by the producer. Supply does not correspond with the consumer demand. This goes to the point whereby consumers are in need or are demanding more of the product, but the supplier is supplying less of what is demanded by the consumer. Therefore, that goes straight to the allocative inefficiency. And then the productive inefficiency or technical inefficiency. So productive inefficiency occurs when business does not produce optimum output according to its inputs. So this talks to business being given some resources to produce a certain quantity of goods, but the business failed to provide that quantity of goods that is desired or that is supposed to be produced with the given input. So that is the productive inefficiency. So that means the producer is not efficient, but is inefficient in producing because goods are not produced at the right quantity, while the resources are all provided at the right level or at the right amount. So there are enough resources, but the output is not enough. So something is compromised in that the producer is not producing goods efficiently. More resources are used to produce fewer goods and services. So that means as resources are being used, the producer is using even more resources, but very few goods and services are made available or are produced. So that is a productive inefficiency because instead of producing the desired quantity according to the given resources, the producer produces less with those resources, all of them. So the producer is not producing efficiently in that case, but is producing inefficiently because the given resources are supposed to be producing a particular quantity of those goods, but the producer is producing maybe less of that desired quantity. So that is regarded to be a productive inefficiency. Resources are not used appropriately to produce the maximum number of goods at the lowest cost and best quality. Remember that producers have this exercise to ensure that they try to find the best alternative to produce goods at the lower cost. So there's always a room to produce at the lower cost. So in this case, the resources are not used in the good way to produce the maximum number of goods at the lowest possible cost and at the best quality. There is a room to reduce costs without producing fewer goods or without producing lower quality products or services. So this inefficiency, as much as it is prevalent, there is always a method or mechanism for the producer to produce more goods without having to do what? To compromise. So there is a room to reduce cost of production. So the firm can be able to produce more at the lower cost without having to produce fewer goods or without producing the lower quality of goods. So if a firm is very much efficient, it always try to find alternative that will allow it to produce more goods at the lowest possible cost without compromising the quality. And then these inefficiencies are explained through what? Through the PPC, the production possibility curve. So both productive and technical inefficiencies are well explained through the PPC, which is the production possibility curve. So it will be explained. Production possibility curve is the curve which shows various combinations of the amount of two goods which can be produced within the given resources. So in this case, the PPC simply measure the combination of two goods that can be produced with the given resources. So if ever the producer is given a certain amount of money, that amount of money will be shared among these two goods and then they will be produced. That's when we discover compromises that are done by producers as they want to produce more of the particular product and produce less of the particular product. PPC is concave to both axes since it shows the combination of goods on vertical and horizontal axis. One product is on the vertical axis and one product is on the horizontal axis. So that's why we say it is concave on both axes. The increase or decrease in any two products is shown along the axis. So any movement on the quantity produced will be indicated in both the vertical axis and horizontal axis in our PPC. So the PPC is coming here, it's being illustrated. So on our vertical we have bands, on our horizontal we have rods, and then this is our PPC being drawn. And then there is the point inside the PPC, which is point D. And then on our vertical axis we have A, and then horizontal work B, meaning our PPC moved from A to B. And then that is the point C along the PPC, or the point on the PPC. And then that is our indifferent curve. And then we have the point outside the PPC that will simply prevail. Yes, this is the complete PPC now. So in explanation of this, it was covered in grade 10, but now we are simply explaining inefficiencies that occur within this PPC. So in this case, we say any point inside the PPC, which is point D in this situation, indicates allocative inefficiency, because the resources here are not used at their optimum level. Not all resources have been utilized by the business or by the firm. So this indicates that the resources are underused, they are underutilized. This indicates allocative inefficiency, which automatically result to productive inefficiency. And then any point along the PPC, which for this situation, our point C, indicates the allocative efficiency. So this point along, it means that resources have been used accordingly, have been optimally used to produce these two goods and services. And this point is also productive efficient. And then point E, any point outside the PPC is not attainable, because firm is having less resources to produce at this point. Resources are only available to produce along the PPC. So outside the PPC, the firm cannot afford to produce. So we say this point is unattainable. So the firm cannot afford to achieve this point or to produce at point E. And then our indifferent curve is indicated by FF. So that is our indifferent curve. So the graph explanation, our PPC comes back as it is. And then PPC is represented by AB. So AB indicates the PPC. And then at point A, the business is only producing bonds. So at this point, which is point A, the business is not producing anything on the product B, but is only producing bonds here at point A. Point B, product B is not produced at all, meaning rolls are not produced at all. At point B, the business only produces rolls at this point. The business only produces rolls, is not producing any bonds on our vertical axis. Point D, which is the point inside. Point D inside the PPC indicate that resources are not optimally used. So this indicates that resources are not all utilized. It is therefore depicts allocative and productive inefficiency. So this point here indicates allocative inefficiency of resources and also productive inefficiency, because goods are not made available at the right quantity to consumers, because resources are underused. Point C, on the PPC, indicate productive efficiency and allocative efficiency as it touches the indifferent curve. So at this point where the indifferent curve touches our PPC, that point indicates allocative efficiency and productive efficiency there. And then the point outside the PPC, like it was explained, is not achievable. So point E outside the PPC is unattainable. Less resources are available to produce at point E. So the firm can only be able to produce along the PPC. It cannot afford to produce outside the PPC because resources are not enough. So that point E is not achievable or is not attainable by the firm. And then Pareto inefficiency. Remember, Pareto inefficiency occurs when it's impossible to improve someone's welfare without compromising someone else. So Pareto inefficiency refers to a situation whereby resources cannot be allocated to make one person better off without making another person worse off. Whenever we come across Pareto inefficiency, it's always difficult to make someone better without making someone worse off. To make someone better, someone must be compromised, someone should be worse off. That is regarded to be Pareto inefficiency. And then Pareto efficiency does not necessarily mean a fair allocation of resources. Pareto improvement takes place when resources are allocated, resources are reallocated in a way that makes one person better off without making anyone else worse off. So the Pareto efficiency will always be achieved if one person is made better without making someone worse off. But the Pareto inefficiency prevails or occurs if it's impossible to make someone better without making someone worse off. So this is the assessment on our PPC. You were given the graph here It was extracted from DBE 2019. So it is edited. Not all questions that were there are exactly the same, so it's been edited. We have our PPC here. You can see there is a point inside the PPC, and then we have points along the PPC and the point outside the PPC. So we focus mainly on this original PPC. Then identify the number of houses the market will provide if all resources were spent on houses. So remember, we look here on our vertical, we have housing, horizontal, we have schools. And then the second question, what is depicted by point A? And then briefly describe the concept technical inefficiency. Why is the point E unnecessary for the firm above, this point outside the PPC? And then, how can the business increase the output of product B without any effect on the Pareto inefficiency? And then let's see at the possible responses on this. So, the number of houses the market will provide if all resources were spent on houses will be 10,000. There we go. That is 10 in terms of thousands. And then what is depicted by point A? Point A inside here. Point A indicates allocative inefficiency, which automatically leads to the productive inefficiency because resources are underutilized in here. And then briefly describe the concept technical inefficiency. The technical inefficiency occurs when resources are not used appropriately to produce the maximum number of goods at the lowest possible cost at the best quality. And then we continue with the marketing guideline. Why is point E unnecessary for the firm above? Point E is outside the PPC. It is not attainable as the firm has less resources. So remember, point E is outside the PPC there. So in that case, this point is not achievable to the producer because the producer is having less resources to produce goods and services along the PPC. How can the business increase the output of product B without any effect on Pareto inefficiency? So the business can find cheap inputs. So the business can find cheap inputs for product B so that it can increase the output without sacrificing the product A resources. So in this case, business can always find cheaper ways or cheaper means of producing the product B without having to compromise the production of the product A. The business can adopt production techniques such as modern technology that can improve efficiency on product B. So the firm can try to adopt the technology that can try to improve the efficiency on the production of the product B without having to compromise the production of product A. And then externalities as consequence of market failure. So from the examination guideline, this is the question: describe the following with the aid of well-labeled graphs. Negative externalities as well as positive externalities. It's very important that you are able to explain them using graphs because they normally come into our examination. So the negative externalities. So the consequences of negative externalities are that they reduce social welfare. We know that negative externalities are always reducing social welfare gains. So they result to a reduction of social welfare because people and society are always compromised if ever there's a negative externality. Things that contain negative externalities include exhaust gas pollution, tobacco smoking, and alcohol abuse. They contain the negative externality. Part of the external cost associated with the use of such items is not paid by producers, but the society. So this kind of the pollution that is caused by using these materials, such as exhaust gas pollution, tobacco, and abuse of the alcohol. Some of these costs are not paid by whom? By producers, but they are paid by consumers as the end users, and they are also paid by the entire society because they can spill over to the next person while a person was not involved in the consumption of the particular product. For instance, tobacco can have that effect because of pollution. There is a definite link between air pollution and a range of illnesses. If ever there is a company within the place that is causing air pollution or that is burning fossil fuels, people around the area will be infected maybe through asthma, and that results to them having to pay extra cost because of illnesses that are not paid by whom? By the producer. They are only paid by consumers or people around the area. We continue with the negative externality. Treatment of these illnesses is the extra cost to the public. So if ever someone get to be infected by asthma because of air pollution caused by the firm, that particular individual will have to pay extra cost of consultation in hospitals and doctors. So that simply means the producer is not responsible to pay those costs, but only the household or the citizens or the consumer will be responsible to pay those extra costs. Should the cost associated with the negative externality be considered, it will result to producers' cost increasing, thereby decreasing the output and increasing the price. And then this is the graph which indicates the negative externality. So within this graph, we have our supply curve, original supply curve, which is marginal positive, private cost, and then we have the new original demand curve, which is D, which is marginal private benefits. And then there is the new original equilibrium with the equilibrium quantity, which is Q, and equilibrium price, which is P. And then the state or the government intervene by imposing maybe taxation on this kind of the pollution caused by the firm. And then what happens as a result? If the government intervenes by imposing a green tax or cap tax or environmental tax to this kind of the pollution, it will be very much expensive for the firm to produce more output of this particular product. Therefore, the firm will decide to produce less because of the higher cost of production, will produce less of this particular product, will supply less, which will shift the supply back to the left, to S1. Then it will create the marginal social cost. And then if the supply is declining, shifting to the left, it will be S1, and then the quantity supply will decline from Q to Q1, which will result to higher price as the price will be increasing from P to P1. And then shaded area indicates the external cost or social cost or negative externality. Let's see the interpretation of the same graph coming back. And then DD is the original demand curve. This is DD. DD is the original demand curve, which is marginal private benefit. And then SS represents the original supply curve. So this is SS standing for the original supply curve, which is the marginal private cost. And then the intersection of DD and SS, where they meet at this point, they create equilibrium point, which is E in here, with the equilibrium quantity being Q, this is the equilibrium quantity, and equilibrium price being P up there. These are the original points. And then supply curve shift, the increase in tax on pollution increases the production cost. So the cost of production tends to be increases, and the result to the decrease in the supply for the product. So we have seen the supply for the product declining from Q to Q1, which is indicated by the decline in supply or the backward shift or leftward shift of the supply from SS to S1. And then that results to the creation of the new supply curve. Then we have S1, which brings us, which intersect along with what? With the original DD. So it intersects with the DD in this situation, then the new equilibrium is created in there. So the Q1 is the new equilibrium, while P1 is the new, Q1 is the new equilibrium quantity, while P1 is the new equilibrium price. There you see Q1, new quantity, and then P1 is the new price. So we call them equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And then shaded area indicates the external cost. This area here is indicating external cost or negative externality or the social cost. Ensure that you are able to draw the graph and interpret it so that you can be able to get more marks if ever the graph comes into the examination. So this indicates products or services that are having what we call a positive externality. We have education here as a part of merit code. It only contains positive externality. We have COVID vaccination. It contains the positive externality because it improves someone's health. And then we have libraries that are very important, and they also improve someone's welfare, because if ever someone is studying knowledge at the power, a person tend to be more knowledgeable and be skilled and also be marketable. So positive externalities contain the well-being of the society. They include goods such as education, healthcare, defense force, and being vaccinated. If consumers of goods and services that yield positive externalities acknowledge the social benefit derived from them, they would increase their consumption, which will increase their demand. So this is the graph which indicates the positive externalities. So in this case, we can simply maybe assume that people are getting maybe to be educated, they acquire education for free, even the higher education is simply accessible for free. So this will lead to people being very much trained and being marketable. As a result, people will easily be employable within the labor force or within the workplace. As a result, as people get to employable, they will demand more goods and services. So as they demand more goods and services with more income, the demand curve will be shifting from DD to D1, to D1, D1, which will result to the increase in price because the supply remains constant. So this is our graph which indicates our what we call positive externality. So this is DD as original demand curve and SS as original supply curve. Wherever they meet here at this point, they create the new equilibrium, which is E, and then Q is equilibrium quantity and P is equilibrium price. And then the increase in skills for people, people tend to be more marketable and employable, so they get jobs. As they get jobs, they earn more income. Because of that, what happens? Because of that, there will be a greater demand for goods and services, so the goods demanded will be increasing. And then, so we know that the higher level of income will always shift the demand curve to the right, or will increase demand curve. So demand curve will be shifting from DD to D1, D1, and then that will create the new quantity being produced at Q1, and then the price will be increasing because demand is increasing more than the supply. So the new equilibrium will be formed in there, which is E1. And then let's see the interpretation. We say the shaded area indicate external benefits or positive externality or social benefits. And then the same graph is here. So DD is original demand curve. This is the DD. And then SS represent original supply curve. This is SS, which is original supply curve. And then the intersection of DD and SS create equilibrium, which is point E here. And then P, which is this one, is equilibrium price, and Q is equilibrium quantity. Skill Development Center increase employment opportunities to social members. If ever people are given skills, they tend to be very much marketable and employable. Therefore, people get jobs. Demand curve shift to the right to D1, D1. There is D1, D1. So demand curve have shifted to D1, D1, which is known as marginal social benefit, MSB. And then the new equilibrium is created in the intersection between D1, D1 and SS. Remember, D1, D1 intersect with original supply curve, which is SS here, because supply remains constant. So the new equilibrium point is created, which is E1. So point E1 is the new equilibrium, Q1 is the new equilibrium quantity, and then P1 is the new equilibrium price. And then shaded area indicates the external benefit. This area which is shaded here indicates external benefits or positive externality or the social benefit. And then the assessment on externalities extracted from DBE 2017. Identify the price of cigarette before the tax was imposed. So you are supposed to identify the price here. Remember, given the graph, you must firstly interpret your graph. We can see on our quantity, we have 200 on the on the new equilibrium. On the original, we have 260. And then as the supply curve shift from SS to S1, S1, we have the new equilibrium created here on the intersection between S1 and S1, S1 as well as DD. And then the new price is what we call 130. You can see the price is increasing. Then you can be able to answer questions. And then what quantity is demanded after the government imposed tax on cigarettes? We can see this is before tax. And then this is after tax. And then briefly describe the concept of negative externalities. And then how does information on cigarette packaging assist on reducing its consumption? Use the graph above and explain how a tax on cigarette will reduce the market failure. Let's check the marketing guideline on this activity. Identify the price on cigarette before a tax was imposed. The price was 100. How do we see that? We see that based on the equilibrium. These are the original points. This is before equilibrium. So that gives you 1 mark. And then what quantity is demanded after the government have imposed tax on cigarette? After the government have imposed tax on cigarette, the quantity is how much? Is 200. You can see the quantity is now 200 after the government have imposed tax on pollution. Basically, this is the quantity supplied. We continue with the marketing guideline. Briefly describe the concept of negative externality. Negative externality is a cost to a third party which is not included in a market price of a good or we can say these are charges that are imposed to a third party. So those are the negative externalities. And then how does information on cigarette packaging assist on reducing its consumption? We know that the packaging of cigarettes is having information about harmful effects that one can come across when smoking cigarette. So information on cigarette packaging create awareness of negative effects. It contains which makes consumers to measure its costs and benefits. As a result, some of them may choose to abstain from using the product, while some of them will choose to use the product. So having this particular information allows the consumer to be able to analyze and check cost and benefits before deciding to make use of the product. Therefore, some will be deciding to abstain from using the cigarette because the consumers are fully informed about negative effects it contains. We continue the marking guidelines. So use the graph above and explain how tax on cigarette will reduce the market failure. So we can see the tax on cigarette. It has resulted to what? To the decline in quantity supplied from 260 to 200. And then the price have increased from 100 to 130. That means now people are starting not to demand most of a cigarette because they are fully aware of externalities that it contains. Also, it is more expensive to consumers. So consumers that are not affording might abstain from taking cigarettes. So market failure will be reduced because the tax on cigarette will increase the price of the good, which will shift the supply to the left, SS to S1, S1. At the new equilibrium, E1, fewer units are demanded, which is 200 units, which is socially more desirable. So in this case, people will be demanding less of cigarettes because they are no longer affording more due to the fact that the price is higher. So the negative externality will be reduced because of that. And then this is sourced from examination guideline. This is actually our examination guideline. Exam guideline and circular E21 possible essay discussing detailed state intervention as a consequence of market failures with or without the aid of relevant graphs. So in this case, it is very important for you to know that the essay can come in where you are supposed to draw graphs. But at times the essay can simply come in where you are not supposed to draw the graph. So you need to read the essay statement thoroughly with understanding before you attempt to answer, because at times they will be saying without using graphs, and then you decide to use graphs, then you will be forfeiting marks. So in this case, we are discussing the direct control as a consequence of market failure. How does the government directly intervene to control in order to reduce the market failure? So the government uses legislation, laws, and regulations as intervention to restrict the production of goods and services that have the negative externality. So the state simply intervened by laying out some rules and regulations in order to prohibit the production of some goods and services that are containing the negative externalities. To restrict overconsumption, the state legislate laws that directly limit businesses from making the provision of those goods and services. So there are some laws that are simply made by the government to ensure that businesses are not supplying those goods and services. E.g., unprescribed drugs are not allowed to be supplied. Therefore, businesses are not allowed to produce those goods and those drugs. Therefore, that simply means if one is found supplying them, the person will be found guilty of that particular misconduct. So it's not allowed. Those are rules and regulations that are simply given by the government. In South Africa, tobacco advertising is prohibited, meaning businesses that are producing tobacco are not allowed to advertise tobacco. That's a part of rule and regulation that have been legislated by the government to prevent the consumption of what? The overconsumption of tobacco. Tobacco producers are forced to make a provision of negative effects on the packaging of the product. So if you can read through the packaging of the tobacco in the negative effects are provided on the packaging, and that information there is made available through the direct control by the government to force businesses to provide information that is relevant in order for consumers not to overconsume the product. Regulations for advertising exist to prevent false claims and deceptive advertising. So advertising itself is regulated. Firms cannot simply advertise in any manner because at times they might be providing false information and deceptive advertising that will allow them simply to push sales while they are compromising the social welfare. And then we continue with the direct control. Public awareness is made on alcohol as it is being restricted to be sold to people under the age of 18. So that's simply the part of laws and regulations that are set by the government. Motorists are not allowed to have a certain percentage of alcohol in their bodies while they are driving. Drinking and driving is prohibited. So this is the part of regulation. When you are using alcohol, you cannot drive while you are in the influence of alcohol. That's a part of regulation under the direct control. Selling unprescribed and illegal drugs is prohibited. So those drugs should not be sold. That is stated by the law. It is not allowed. With regards to imperfect information, government require businesses to disclose information about their operations. So it is very important. The government pushes businesses to make the provision of information about their operation and products, either on their website or on packaging itself for their products. And then we continue with the direct control. In other instances, government require firm product to meet a certain standards. For instance, cars must satisfy a certain safety standard set by the government. So some standards or requirements are set by the government to be made by some products that are produced in the market, so that they will be made available into the society or into the economy. The SAPS regulates the standard in South Africa. All firms must produce goods that meet the certain health, safety, and quality standards. So SAPS is the one which is used to ensure that it monitors the standards in production of some goods and services within the country. So this is because of the state intervention in terms of direct control, ensuring that people are not simply exploited, or consumers are not simply exploited by firms as they do illegal practices, etc. And then imperfect markets. How does the state intervene to control or to reduce the imperfect market effect in order to avoid the market failure? So producers are motivated to maximize profits which occur at the expense of consumers. We know that producers are always trying to control their prices, charging higher prices in order to maximize their profits. And that alone is a problem. It will be discussed. Firms restrict output. That is the first one. Firms restrict output and increase their prices in order to gain much of profits. They use their licensing and patents to restrict the entry of new business, which is commission. So they restrict competition by using their licensing and as well as patents or exclusive rights. They withhold information to maintain market dominance. Some of them do not disclose their information, especially firms under imperfect markets. They withhold their information to ensure that they keep on dominating the market, and use aggressive advertising to drive other competitors out of the market. So they use advertising that is very much aggressive to ensure that competitors do not stand a chance to enter the market and compete with them. Collusion by oligopolies reduce competition and keep prices high as consumers engage, as competitors engage in price fixing. So we know that oligopolies are the ones that are mostly evident in terms of collusion. So they get together through cartels or implicit collusions by doing what? By fixing prices and production techniques, which always compromises the competition and reduce social welfare. Monopolies use their dominant positions and the market power to solely control the supply of a unique product. So monopolies, we know that they are the only suppliers of a unique product. So they use their dominant positions and the market power to simply supply this particular unique product within the entire market, which brings some issues because the product might be undersupplied within the market because there's only one supplier of the product. We continue with the imperfect markets. The government introduced the Commission Policy Act of South Africa of 1998 to promote healthy and market efficiency. So this policy was established by the state to ensure that there's a healthy competition within the market and also there's a market efficiency. So the Act aims to prohibit or on prohibiting the anti-competitive behavior or restrictive practices that firms might be using at the expense of consumers. So the introduction of this Commission Policy Act was simply aiming at reducing the anti-competitive behavior or restrictive practices that allow firms to act in a manner that benefit them at the expense of consumers, whereby they will be doing price fixing and fixing the production in order to keep their prices higher. So the Commission Policy Act is mainly aiming at reducing those effects, which are known as the anti-competitive practices. So there are three bodies of the competition, which are the Competition Commission, the Commission Tribunal, and the Commission Appeals Court that are used to evaluate the illegal measures and investigate any alleged restrictive market practices that might have occurred. So these are three bodies that are working, that were created by the Community Policy Act of South Africa to ensure that they do investigation on any alleged restrictive practices that occur within the market, to ensure that imperfect markets do not take the advantage of consumers and their market dominance. And then the minimum wage. Remember, the minimum wage is the lowest wage that people should not be paid below within a particular industry. So the minimum wage refers to the least amount of money that can be paid to employees, meaning no employee should be paid below that particular wage in that particular industry. When minimum wage has been legislated, no worker should be paid below the prescribed wage level. The minimum wage is established by the government to prevent workers from being exploited by employers. We know that some employers exploit workers by paying them lower salaries. So in this case, minimum wage is created or is legislated by the state to ensure that workers are not exploited by whom? By producers onto lower salaries. It is a mechanism used to reduce economic inequality that exists between economic participants. We know that in the country we have huge economic inequalities, whereby we have very few rich people and so many poor people. So the minimum wage system is there to ensure that economic inequalities are reduced within the economy. So the establishment of minimum wage results to poverty relief and a decent standard of living. If ever minimum wage has been legislated, those people within that particular industry will be earning a reasonable amount of money that is known as a living wage. Then they will be able to live within better living standards, or they will be able to live within, along the poverty line. We continue with the minimum wage. So the effect of minimum wage is that it improves participation of the former marginalized people and increase demand for goods and services. If the minimum wage has been legislated, the economic participation of people will be improved because they are earning now reasonable salaries. Also, it will result to them demanding or affording a little bit more goods and services. This state tax revenues is also affected positively by minimum wage. So if ever minimum wage have been legislated, remember it's a reasonable amount of money. If it qualifies to be taxed by the state, the government will be able to receive a little bit higher tax revenues based on direct tax as well as indirect tax, which is the tax on spending on goods and services within the market. Domestic workers and farm workers are protected by these laws. So workers are protected by this law, especially we talk about domestic workers and farm workers. So these two industries are the ones that are protected through the minimum wage system in South Africa. Minimum wages have some negative effects, which include retrenchment. We know that if the minimum wage is legislated, people or workers might find themselves losing their jobs. How do they lose their jobs? Remember, if ever minimum wage has been legislated, firms find labor costs being very high or being very expensive. As a result, they decide to employ less workers because they cannot afford to pay them these wages and salaries. As a result, they will be retrenching some workers in order to be able to maintain the legislated minimum wage. So it results in retrenchment and unemployment due to high labor costs and excess supply of workers. So there will be more workers willing to work and supply their labor because the wage level is now reasonable. However, firms will find it expensive to employ all these workers. Therefore, they will retrench workers, and then higher unemployment will prevail again in the economy because of legislation of the minimum wage. So to keep minimum wage law functional, the state then intervened by giving employment subsidies to businesses so that they will be able to pay these minimum wages that have been legislated. So the state simply intervened by providing employment subsidies. For instance, maybe the employee was earning 2,000 per month, and then the state intervened by legislation 3,500 minimum wage. That will simply mean the firm might complain to say, we cannot afford to pay all of these workers 3,500, we only afford 2,000. And then what should be done? The government might intervene by providing employment subsidies and say, okay, you provide the 2,000, I will provide 1,500 per worker. Therefore, people will be earning an amount which is not below 3,500. So that is the strategy by the government trying to ensure that people are paid reasonable amount of money within the economy. Workers are not exploited into lower wages and salaries. So minimum wage comes in and then supported by some employment subsidies that are possible in some industries within the economy. So this is our minimum wage graph. We can see we have the supply, we have the demand. And then in here, we know that on our vertical axis, we have the wage rate, and horizontal, we have the quantity of labor demanded and supplied. So let's look at the original points. This is the equilibrium point where the supply meets the demand. So this is supply for labor and the supply for, the demand for labor. So if ever the wage level is 2,000, firms are demanding 30 million workers. So they are able to employ a little bit more workers. But if ever the government intervened by legislating minimum wage, which is 3,500, what happens? Along the demand, firms will be demanding less employees. You can see that firms are now demanding only 20 million workers. They are no longer demanding more, they demand 20 million. Why are they doing so? They are doing this because they don't have enough capacity or enough resources or financial resources to pay minimum wage of 3.5 to all of about 30 million workers. So this becomes the situation. So this is the retrenchment I was talking about, to say a result of retrenchment, because firms find it expensive to employ all of these workers. Then they retrench some of them because they cannot afford to pay the minimum wage of 3,500 per employee. And then what about the supply of the of labor? If ever the wage level is 3,500, labor supplied in the labor market is about 60 million. So this simply means there's an excess supply of labor within the economy or within the market, but the demand for labor is less. So that's why we say the distance between point C and point D simply indicates the surplus of labor. There is more labor available, but labor demanded is very low because the labor cost is very, very high. Let's look at the graph interpretation. The same graph is back in terms of minimum wage. So SS is the supply curve, which indicates the supply of labor, while DD is the demand for labor, which indicates the demand for labor. So these are the points I'm talking about. And then we continue. The market wage is 2,000. So according to the market forces, demand and supply, each worker should be paid about 2,000 per month, not be paid about 3,500. 30 is what? Is the number of labor force employed. So at the equilibrium point, 30 million workers are employed in there at the equilibrium. 3,500 is the minimum wage. Then our 3,500 becomes our minimum wage that no one should be paid below in this particular industry. 3,500 results to the decline in the quantity of labor demanded. So the quantity of labor demanded, you can see that it declined from 30 to 20 million. So because of minimum wage, firms are no longer demanding more workers to work because now they are not having enough amount of money to pay for these workers since the labor cost becomes very much expensive. So it declines from 30 to 20 million, while the quantity of labor supplied increases from 30 to 60. You can see the quantity of labor simply increase from 30 to 60 million. So people are willing to work for 3,500 because they believe it's a reasonable amount of money. The distance between point C and point D and point B indicates the surplus of labor. So in this case here, we have the surplus of labor because the labor is more, labor supplied is more, but labor demanded is less here. So this distance from C to B simply indicate the labor surplus in the labor market. And then this is the minimum wage assessment. Why does the implementation of the minimum wage lead to unemployment? So let's say minimum wage leads to fewer jobs. The amount of labor hired in the market decreases because of increased cost. Like I've said, the labor costs tend to be very, very high. As a result, unemployment starts to increase if ever minimum wage has been legislated, if the state does not intervene by providing employment subsidies. If workers are paid more, employers will hire few as there will be fewer jobs available, especially for the low-skilled workers and young people. Less skilled workers, low-skilled workers, young people will be exposed to fewer jobs, meaning there will be few jobs made available for unskilled workers. Low-paying jobs requiring low skills are the jobs likely to decline if ever there is a minimum wage. And then workers have varying skills levels, and the minimum wages are unlikely to matter for higher skilled workers. So mostly workers that are unskilled are the ones that are affected by minimum wage because those that are skilled normally earn the amount of money above the poverty line. Employers will substitute away substitute away from the less skilled workers towards more skilled after implementation of the minimum wage. So they will simply hire skilled workers because now there is no incentive of paying more amount of money for unskilled workers while skilled workers are available. Minimum wages can rise the unemployment by giving employers less incentive to hire and more incentive to automate as opposing to hiring workers, leading to the reduction of opportunities for workers to routine jobs and outsourced tasks which were previously performed by low wage employers. So in this case, firms might find themselves not even employing these workers, but these unskilled workers, their work can be compromised, and firms might find themselves outsourcing those products that were produced by unskilled workers from other firms to avoid having higher cost of production or labor cost. Employers are likely to reduce their, other benefits on the job training and fringe benefits. So some benefits that are normally received by workers might be reduced by employers or firms. If few workers are employed, employers substitute away from the now more expensive labor and towards the inputs such as capital, and costs become higher. Product prices will rise, which further reduces labor demand. This will lead to lower employment opportunities. So this is how we are supposed to respond to the question. There are so many possible answers here that you might have provided. And then setting the minimum prices. Remember, the minimum prices are those prices that are set or administered to be above the market price. We call them the price floors. Minimum price refers to prices that are set above the market price. Remember, the market price, that's the price where goods are supposed to be sold, but these goods are sold above the market price. Mainly, these goods, these prices are administered by the government to accommodate industries that produce critical goods for social welfare. So this is mainly done to accommodate suppliers or encourage suppliers to supply more of this particular product, because maybe it takes time for it to be produced, and also maybe it's necessary for living. Farmers are mostly encouraged to keep their production high through minimum price. So farmers are the ones that are mostly encouraged to keep their production high because their goods are sold at the minimum prices. E.g., we talk about the likes of maize meal and whole wheat. Government intervene to ensure that there is a high enough quantities of basic foodstuff such as maize meal. Minimum prices artificially increase prices and certain goods to keep suppliers within the market. So in this case, the price of certain goods are increased to keep suppliers within the market, not to leave the market. For suppliers to be encouraged and produce more of the product, they are given a chance to set prices above the market price so that they will keep on producing the product, because with the higher price of the product, producers are always motivated to supply more of that particular product. And then this is the graph that indicates the minimum price. And then it's looking the same as the one for the minimum wage. However, now this becomes the quantity of goods and the price of goods. And then the supply SS, the demand, which is DD. Where the supply and demand meet, we create the equilibrium, which is A. And then on the equilibrium price, which is 100 rand, how many units are demanded? 120 units of the products are demanded. But if ever the price increases to the minimum price, which is 150 rand, what will happen? The quantity demanded on the product will decline to 70 units, while the quantity supplied will be higher to 200 units at point B. That simply means that the distance between point A and point B simply indicate the surplus or the supplier surplus or the producer surplus. Producers are supplying more of the product, but the demand for the product is relatively less. Let's see the graph interpretation. So assume that the product is maize. The product that is supplied here is maize. So SS represents the supply for maize, and then DD indicates the demand for maize. And then point E, which is this point, is the equilibrium point created through the intersection of SS and DD. The equilibrium price is 100, which is here, and equilibrium quantity is 120. And then 150 is the minimum price, which result to 70 units demanded by consumers because the price is relatively higher, meaning people are not affording more of this particular product. And then the distance between point A and point B indicates the surplus of maize, meaning the maize is oversupplied here because the quantity supplied for maize increases to 200 units, which is here, and then while the quantity demanded is only at 7. So there's an oversupply of maize meal in this case, which might lead to maize meal being wasted within the market because it can perish. So if it's not demanded well by consumers, it will be wasted. And then the maximum prices, which are the price ceilings. Remember, maximum prices are the prices that are administered by the government to be below the equilibrium or below the market price. So maximum prices are prices that are set below the market price to accommodate economically marginalized groups or underprivileged people to afford the product because maybe it might be very important for social welfare or social well-being. People with less disposable income face a challenge because most goods and services are out of their financial reach due to limited spending capacity. So they have less income, therefore they cannot afford to buy the particular product if it's sold within the market price. Therefore, the state intervenes by ensuring that those goods are sold below the market price. So the state therefore intervene artificially or by artificially decreasing prices of certain goods and services to make them more affordable to consumers, which will allow consumers now, even those that are marginalized, to afford the product. Basic goods such as electricity, water supply, housing, and paraffin are sold below the market price or below market prices to make them more accessible to consumers because they are necessary for living. So these are simply the list of examples that of goods that are sold at the maximum prices or price ceilings or the prices below the market equilibrium. So we continue with maximum prices. Maximum prices increases the demand for goods and services or for those goods that are affected. So there will be more demand for those goods in the economy because now those goods are more affordable. However, the supply will be declining because producers will be finding no incentive to supply more of the product if the product is selling below the market price, meaning expected profit will not be achieved by the producer. This reduces poverty. So as from this point, so if ever people can afford the product, this will lead to the reduction of poverty and economic inequalities because most people will be able to afford the product. Maximum price increase and inability for marginalized people to participate in the economy since they can afford those necessary goods and services. So it's similar to the ability of marginalized people to afford the particular product and demand it because now the product is sold at the lowest possible cost, which is below the market equilibrium. So the maximum price discourages suppliers from making the provision of this particular product because they don't find any good incentive whenever they sell below the market price, since their prices are determined through intersection of demand and supply. The supply of the product tend to be lower than the demand of the product. So there will be the undersupply of the product along the supply curve, while the demand for the product will be very high because people will be affording the product. So this leads to suppliers deciding to supply less of the product, such as merit goods, and then the government decide to intervene and supplying this product, especially education. The market undersupply education, while the government decide to intervene and supply this education to those people that are not willing to afford, because the government want this kind of the service to be sold below the market price, since the product is very much necessary for social welfare and social well-being. This lead to shortages of goods or services and may lead to the formation of black markets. If ever this is the case, and then the market is forced to supply the product below the market price or equilibrium, then this will simply lead to the formation of black markets, whereby people will be selling these goods illegally within the economy, since they are avoiding being investigated by the government through selling the product above or on the market price. So this is the graph indicating the price ceilings or maximum prices. We can see at the original point, which is equilibrium, that is SSDD, which is our original demand curve. So this is the intersection between demand and supply originally. The price is 100 rand and the quantity is 150 units. And then if the government intervenes by legislating or administering maximum prices, which are the prices below the market price, the price of the product will be going to 50 rand. If it goes to 50 rand, what will happen then? The quantity supplied or the supply by businesses will simply decline from 150 to 100 units because they find less incentive to supply the product since it's selling below the market price. And then the quantity demanded of the product is very, very high, is 200 units, meaning there's an undersupply. So the distance from this point A and point B, simply indicate the shortage of the product within the market. So there's an undersupply. The supply only ends within this range, and then the demand is very, very high because it continues from 50 going up to point B, meaning the product is undersupplied within the market while there's a higher demand for the product. And then the graph interpretation as the original supply for education, while DD is the original demand for what we call the demand for education. So 100 is the equilibrium price and 150 is the equilibrium quantity. Point E is the equilibrium point created through intersection of SS and DT. This is the point that I'm talking about. So that's where demand and supply meet. And then the state intervention through maximum prices decreases the price of education from 100 to 50 or to 50 rand. So the price tends to below, it goes down to 50 rand. And then what happens? The quantity of education supplied by the market decreases from 100, decreases to 100. So it decreases from 150 to 100. While the quantity demanded increases to 200, meaning in this case now we come across the shortage of education within this range. The education will be here up to this range. From this point going further to point B, education will not be supplied by the market. Then the government decide to intervene. Excess demand prevail. The distance between point A and point B indicate the shortage of education from the market. Therefore, the state intervened by making the provision of education. And then the effect of levying taxes. If the government intervened by levying taxes on demerit goods, such as the cigarette, alcohol, and also we have an increased tax on sugar beverages. It has been increased over and over again on our budget. So indirect taxes are levied on goods and services that have negative externalities to recover their external cost. The government discourages the consumption of certain goods by increasing taxes on them to restrict the oversupply of those goods and services. We can see the cigarettes always selling at the higher price because of higher taxes that are imposed on them. Also alcohol, and the government have introduced increased taxes on what? On beverages that are having much sugar to reduce the consumption because it's also having the negative externality. These goods compromise the social welfare, hence the state intervention is required. So using these goods will always compromise social welfare or will tamper with someone's health. Therefore, the state intervention is necessary. Affected goods include cigarette, alcohol, and sugar beverages. So these are affected by the government having to impose more taxes on them to prevent the overconsumption on these goods and services. So this is the graph that indicates levying of taxes. So we can see the supply curve is shifting. The demand curve is original, which is DD, as original. So equilibrium point is created here where demand intersects with the supply. Original quantity is Q and the original price or equilibrium price is P. And then the government intervened by imposing tax on these goods and services, maybe on cigarette. If the government imposes more indirect tax on cigarette and then suppliers find it unnecessary to supply more of this product because so it becomes consumers demand less of this particular product. As they demand less because it's very much expensive to demand, to buy the product because of the government intervention through taxation. As a result, the supply for the product decline from S1 from SS to S1, we can see the supply, and then create the new equilibrium point, which is E1, and then we have the new quantity, which is Q1, and then P1 is our new price. Then the product becomes expensive, and less people decide to consume the product, and other people decide to abstain from consuming the product because of its higher cost. So the government uses this to prevent the consumption of the product because it contains negative externalities within the economy. So this is the graph being interpreted. Like I said, DD, original demand, SS, original supply curve. Here we are talking about these points. And then the intersection of DD and SS create equilibrium point, which is E there. And then with Q being equilibrium quantity and P equilibrium price. So we continue with the effect of indirect taxes. So the increase in tax on production, on the production cost, and result to the decrease in supply for this particular product. So the supply is declining from S to S1 as the quantity supply declines from Q to Q1. Supply curve shift to the left from S1 to S1. The new equilibrium is created, which is E1 in there, and then on the intersection of S1 and DD. Q1 is the new equilibrium quantity, while P1 is the new equilibrium price. We can see Q1 here and P1 there, meaning the price is increasing. And then the decrease in consumption of affected goods, this decreases the consumption of affected goods as they become more expensive. So people decide to consume less of these goods and services because they are becoming expensive in the economy. So some people decide to abstain from consuming these goods because they are expensive. So the government wins this particular war because the government is mainly aiming on reducing the consumption of these goods because they contain the negative externality within the economy. And then the effect of subsidies. Subsidies refer to financial aid given to producers to reduce the production cost and increase the production of certain goods and services. So this can be a cash or grant given by the government to businesses in order to cut off or to reduce their cost of production, and then they can be able to reduce to produce more goods. So subsidies can be direct or indirect. If we talk about direct subsidies, we talk about cash grants, and if we talk about indirect subsidies, we talk about the non-financial incentives. So direct subsidies are cash grants or financial incentive, which is the production cost burden on producers. And then indirect subsidies include non-financial incentives such as tax rebate or tax exemption, the government surety given on loans from commercial banks, and other benefits that do not involve money in a form of cash. The introduction of a subsidy results to the increase in output produced by the firm, hence the increase in the supply of the product. If ever the subsidy has been introduced by the state on the particular product given to the firm will be producing more of that product and the supply will increase, which will lead to the lower price of that particular product. Subsidies can be used for a variety of purposes, including production, income, and employment, including exports. This is the graph that depicts providing subsidies to firms. We can see original points. That is our SS, which is the supply curve for the product, and this is DD, which is the demand curve for the product. So our price is P, our quantity is Q. The state intervened by providing the subsidy to this particular business. So this business will be able to produce more goods at the lower cost. Therefore, the supply will be increasing from from SS to S1, which will be indicated by the increase in the quantity from Q to Q1. And then the price of the product will be declining from P to P1, corresponding to the law of supply. And then let's see the graph interpretation. The same graph is back. DD is the original demand curve, while SS is the original supply curve. This is our DD, and then this is our SS. And then original equilibrium point is created on the intersection of DD and SS. This is the point of originals. And then equilibrium point is there, which is A. The subsidy shift SS to S1 with the increase in quantity supplied from Q to Q1. So as the subsidy is introduced, the supply can shift from SS to S1, and then the new equilibrium is created whenever S1 intersects with the DD. Then the new equilibrium is created, and then the new quantity is created, which is Q1, and the price is created, which is mu there, which is P1 down there. And then the assessment for the introduction of subsidies. With the aid of a graph, explain the impact of state subsidies on the production of goods and services. There is the graph given, is drawn there. And then this is the allocation of marks. Marks were supposed to allocate like this. Original equilibrium was supposed to be 1 mark. New equilibrium is 1 mark. Change in price is 1 mark. And then change in quantity is 1 mark. So this is the change in quantity. This is the change in price. And then this is the original quantity, original equilibrium. This is the new equilibrium. So all of them were credited a mark. And this is the explanation. The government provides subsidies to producers in order to encourage them to increase the production of goods. And then producer subsidies are often given to suppliers of agricultural products such as milk, wheat, and maize. And then we continue. Subsidies lower the cost of producing goods, and thus the market price of these goods will be lowered, which to allow people to afford more. If the government subsidizes the production of a product, the market price will decrease to P1. There is the P1. with corresponding increase in the quantity from Q to Q1. The quantity will be increasing from Q to Q1 because of the state intervention through the provision of a subsidy. And then redistribution as a part of a consequence of market failure. How does the government intervene to redistribute income and wealth in order to prevent the market from failing? Redistribution methods are necessary for the economy to reduce economic inequalities. We know that in our economy we have huge inequality. Therefore, redistribution methods should be taken into account by the government. And then the gap between middle and working class results to the government intervention to redistribute income so marginalized can earn basic living. South African government has introduced many redistribution measures as mechanism to combat poverty and redress economic imbalances of the past. The state can use taxes, so the government uses progressive tax system whereby high income earners are paying more tax while lower income earners are paying less tax. Taxation is the main source of government state revenues in South Africa, and then the tax revenues are then used in the state extensive expenditure, which is documented in the national budget. So these revenues are the ones that are used in allocation of the state budget. And the state expenditure includes social transfers, social services, and infrastructure development. The state also creates sustainable jobs, opportunities for unemployed through the EPWP, which are the Expanded Public Works Program. Remember, if people are given EPWP, they will attain some skills. As they get those skills, they will be involved in those short-term projects, and then after that, they will remain with those skills that can be used even in future to earn employment for themselves. So redress methods measures have been continuously implemented by the government as a part of economic transformation, whereby the government tries to transform the economy of the past, ensuring that everyone is accommodated in the economic participation. This is done to ensure economically excluded people are able to participate in the economic mainstream. This allows economically marginalized people and disadvantaged people to simply participate in the economy without any constraints. The introduction of Triple BE, which is the broad-based economic empowerment, have improved procurement for former marginalized people. It has allowed them to own some basic assets and resources within the economy, also occupying higher positions in the workplace. Employment Equity Act was legislated to promote affirmative action, ensuring that people are not discriminated in the workplace. People are having access to equal opportunities without, regardless of race, gender, as well as the color. And then government involvement in production. How does the government get to be involved in production? To ensure macroeconomic stability. The government intervenes through the public goods provision. Governments are involved in producing goods and services for themselves. Those goods are the ones that are undersupplied or not provided at all by the market. Government's approach to incomplete markets is to intervene and supply the desired public goods directly. So for those goods that are undersupplied by the market, the state intervenes by making their provisions. They raise taxes and provide the goods themselves. So they ensure that they get more tax revenues and make the provision of these public goods and services for themselves without depending on the market or the private sector. Income taxes, indirect taxes, and wealth taxes are used to pay for these goods and services. So these goods are financed by the tax revenues and from income tax, wealth tax, as well as the property taxes. These also include indirect taxes. We continue the public goods. Community goods are provided free of charge, such as defense force, police services, correctional service, as well as street lighting, including traffic light. Some collective goods are provided for user fee, so meaning they are not provided for free, such as refuse removal, waste disposal, and sewage and drainage. And the provision of some other collective goods is subsidized. For example, clean water and electricity are subsidized. The government can also provide merit goods directly. The example can be education and healthcare provided by the government because the market undersupplied them. Macroeconomic stability. If markets are free and the objective of goods, objectives such as economic growth and employment are not simply achieved, the state will be involved in the economy. So the government may perceive it as a market failure and intervene. So if these objectives are not met while the market is free, meaning there is no government intervention, there is a free market operation, that will lead to the state intervening if ever full employment is not achieved, economic stability is not achieved, exchange rate stability is not achieved, then the state will intervene by making some provisions in the economy, because that is regarded to be a market failure. The intervention focuses either on the demand side or supply side. So the state can simply intervene through using demand side policies and supply side policies. Demand side policies, we remember that they are mainly used to ensure that people are able to demand more goods and services within the economy, while supply side are mainly aiming at ensuring that firms are not having supply constraints. They will be able to supply goods that are desired or demanded in the economy. So the Keynesians believe that government have important stabilization function. They believe that economic stability is best achieved by the intervention with appropriate macroeconomic policies. We continue with macroeconomic stability. The most important of these policies include fiscal policy and monetary policy that are used for the government intervention under demand side and supply side policies. I mean demand side policies, and then the supply side policies. Sometimes the objectives are not reached because of the market rigidness. So that means markets are too rigid. They are not able to do what? To be flexible and supply goods that are demanded by consumers. Therefore, the state should intervene by ensuring that firms are able to supply goods and services. The supply side focuses on capability of economy and on policies that attempt to expand the stock of production factors and infrastructure and improve flexibility of factor market. So ensuring that factors of production are very much flexible in the firms are able to achieve and produce goods and services as desired in the economy. Then that is supported by doing what? By ensuring that the state can intervene by lowering the cost of doing the business, and then also the state can deregulate some rules and regulations in the economy to ensure that the market is a little bit free to attract even foreign investors. The state can also intervene by the Competition Policy Act of South Africa by promoting fair competition and efficiency in the market to ensure that there is more establishment of new businesses. So in this kind of the topic, you on the supply side, you focus on the supply side policies that were spoken about in term 1 under supply side. So this is the essay discussing detail state intervention as a consequence of market failure. This was taken from November 2021, with or without the aid of graphs. So we are providing here, these are the subheadings: direct control, imperfect markets, minimum wage law, maximum prices, minimum prices, taxes and subsidies, and then this is a repeat, and then redistribution, and then involvement in production. This is how the state can intervene. This is the essay. There's an introduction, remember? Then we define here the market failure. When market failure occurs, consequences such as inefficiency, spillover effects, imperfect competition, and government intervention are likely to prevail if ever the market is failing. So these are the parts. Then the main part of the essay, state intervention as a consequence of market failure. Then we talk about the following: direct control. That's where the government intervenes directly. So that has been explained in the previous slide. So the state can pass some laws or use existing legislative framework to control businesses and industries, individuals who generate negative externalities. So they can be controlled to reduce these in what we call externalities. Thus, in South Africa, emissions of potentially dangerous chemicals, air and arsenic pollutions, environmental and preservation are controlled through Carriers Act regulations. And then advertising by the tobacco industry is prohibited, and alcohol may not be sold to persons below the age of 18. We continue with the essay. The government can deal with imperfect competition by formulating or implementing the competition policy to increase the level of competition in the economy, using laws on competition to prevent exorbitant prices charged by firms to ensure that entry to the market is free, prevent harmful collusions, and encourage foreign competition, which helps to keep prices low. Granting licenses to more businesses in the case of state monopolies. Imposing price controls to decrease prices of goods and services. We continue. Levying of taxes. The government will intervene in the market by levying taxes to recover the external costs that prevail. These taxes will increase the price and will result to the decrease in production of that particular product that is sold, which is containing negative externality. Levying taxes could be used as a strategy of reducing production and consumption of demerit goods, as well as generating revenues for the state. So there are two purposes here, is to reduce the consumption and the production and also generating revenues for the government. Firms and consumers will then be allocating resources in a more efficient way in this case. We continue the producer subsidies. If ever the government intervenes providing subsidies, the government provides subsidies to producers to encourage them to produce more of these products and services that are subsidized. Subsidies increase supply of specific goods and services such as milk, wheat, and maize meal. Subsidies lower the cost of producing goods and services that market prices of goods are lowered, increasing the consumption by consumers. Minimum wage law. So the minimum wage law is the lowest remuneration that employers are required by law to pay their workers, meaning they cannot pay anything below, like I've said before. Income for workers will increase, and this will result to their standard of living being improved, which will improve the social welfare, since they will be able to meet their basic needs in the economy. If the minimum wage is set above the equilibrium, the market wage supply of labor will exceed the demand for labor. So there will be more demand, there will be less demand for labor, while the supply for labor will be more, which will lead to excess supply. And minimum wage continues. And then this will increase the cost of labor, resulting to higher cost of production for business. So business will be facing the higher production cost, which will result to them retrenching people. Then there will be high level of unemployment. So retrenchment will occur, then unemployment will increase because of minimum wage. Minimum wage will lead to more bargaining power of workers. So that will lead to workers getting together and also in a form of unions to do what? To appeal and complain based on a retrenchment that prevails because of the minimum wage. That will also attract government intervention through the employment subsidy, like I said before. Minimum prices that are, the government is obliged to intervene to ensure sufficient supplies of staple foodstuff. So it is very important that a particular foodstuff is made available at all times in the economy. The approach of setting minimum price or price floors will be used so that it will be worthwhile for producers to make a comfortable profit and produce essential goods desired in desired quantities in the economy. These are prices that are set above the market price that we have said before, so they are administered by the government. We continue with the minimum price. The minimum price, however, have unwanted side effects as they cause surplus in the market. So there will be a market surplus or oversupply of goods that can be wasted in the economy. Surplus production becomes a challenge to dispose, as they should rather be sold at the lower cost within the country or dumped into other countries as they are sold at the lower cost, which is prohibited by the World Trade Organization. So they can be destroyed if ever they are available in large quantities within the country, if they cannot be dumped in the foreign countries. Maximum prices. The government will also intervene by setting prices below the equilibrium so that they can be demanded. Those are the basic goods that are very much necessary or essential for living. The maximum price that is set by the government below the market price is known as the price ceilings. We call this one price ceilings. The government will intervene in the market by passing laws that suppliers may not charge more than the maximum price. So any supplier that is supplying the product cannot charge above the maximum price or the price ceiling. The immediate effect of maximum price in the market is that the quantity of goods supplied will drop or will decline, thus causing the shortage of goods, because consumers will be demanding more of this particular product since they will be affording, while firms will be supplying less of the product. That will lead to the shortage. Shortages in supply for certain goods in the market will result to establishment of black markets. Then businesses will decide to sell these goods illegally, because now they are forced not to sell within or below the market price. Redistribution methods. So South African government uses progressive tax system to redistribute income and wealth in South Africa in order to reduce income and economic inequalities. Traditional methods such as levying various taxes, provisioning of free services, benefits of the kind, cash benefits, are used to reduce income gap within the country. The government can also implement redress methods such as BBBE, affirmative action, land restitution, and land redistribution and property subsidies to reduce or to redistribute wealth among the population. We continue. Government involvement in production. The state can be involved by subsidizing merit goods to increase the production, imposing taxes on demerit goods to reduce their production, levying taxes, which are the income taxes, direct taxes, and wealth taxes, to provide community goods free of charge into the economy. Providing collective goods such as refuse removal, waste disposal, and sewage drainage for user charges. And then we are reaching the point where we have exhausted our slides. So bear in mind, it is very important to ensure that as you start your consequences of market failure, do the following. Prepare yourself on graphs. Be able to draw graphs, all of them. And if you draw the graph, remember the principle. You provide the heading for the graph. There must be a heading for the graph. After providing the heading, you illustrate your axes, both vertical and horizontal, and then you label them because you will having some a credit for that. And then you draw your graph completely. After that, you must be able to interpret your graph. Remember, when you do the graph interpretation, you don't just bring information that is not on the graph. You bring information that is taken from the graph. Then we call that a graph interpretation. So ensure that we are able to draw all of these graphs that are evident. Remember, we have what we call inefficiencies. That's when you will be able to draw your PPC. It is very important for you to explain both the allocative inefficiency and productive inefficiency using PPC as illustrated. So, as we explain, you remember that any point inside the PPC indicates allocative inefficiency, which result to productive inefficiency. It is very important to know that any point outside the PPC, along the PPC, is productive efficiency and allocative efficient. And then any point outside, away from PPC, is not attainable because the firm is having less resources available to produce at that particular combination of production. And then you go further. You go straight to the direct control. That's when you need to explain how does the government simply intervene directly in the economy in order to control or to prevent the market failure. That's when the state intervened by passing some laws and rules and regulations to prevent the market from failing. That's when the state intervened by ensuring that monopolies are not abusing their power. Oligopolies are not abusing their power to ensure their dominance by fixing price at the expense of consumers. And then you continue by going straight to minimum wage law. That's when you have to explain the minimum wage. If you explain the minimum wage, you define minimum wage, and then you explain the effect of the minimum wage in the theory. Then you must be able to draw the graph and interpret the graph. And then you must indicate all points in there and show those effects of the minimum wage. Remember that minimum wage simply have some positive effects because people will be earning a reasonable wage that will allow them to earn a living. Also, the positive effect, they will be able to afford goods and services. However, firms will find it expensive to demand the labor because now labor cost will be higher. Therefore, there will be retrenchment, which is the negative effect. Because of that, what will happen? Employed people or demand for labor will decline while there is an oversupply of labor, which will result to the surplus of labor supply in the economy. However, the government can intervene in those industries where it has legislated minimum wage by providing employment subsidies to ensure that people are not retrenched in the workplace. And then you go to the minimum prices. That's when you talk about a price that are set above equilibrium. Those are prices that are administered by the government. We call them price floors. They are legislated to ensure that businesses such as farmers are encouraged to keep on producing or making goods available in the economy because those goods are very much important for living. So that is there to encourage farmers to keep on supplying the product or to remain within the market. However, in there is a negative effect because consumers find themselves not affording the product, which will lead to the excess supply or oversupply of the product or the surplus of the product in the market. If there is a surplus, it might lead to the product being wasted or being dumped into the international market. We all know that dumping is not allowed or is prohibited by the World Trade Organization. And then we talk about the maximum price, which are the prices that are set below the market price. Those are prices that are there or set by the state or administered by the government so that people can afford those basic needs in the economy. So those prices make goods to be more affordable. However, they have a negative effect on suppliers because suppliers find less incentive to produce the product. As a result, suppliers will be supplying less of the product of the product, there is a more demand of the product. As a result, that will lead to the shortage of the product in the market. Then that's when the government intervene by making the provision of that particular product. Also, there are subsidies that are also given by the government to businesses to ensure that they are able to reduce their cost of production and supply more of those goods, which allow firms to supply more as there is a lesser burden on cost of production for firms. And then we also talk about levying taxes, which are the taxes that are, can be direct or indirect. Mostly indirect taxes on demerit goods or on goods that are having negative externalities. So if ever tax is imposed, the tax can be imposed to reduce the production of the product and reduce the consumption, which is the win strategy for the government, because the government also tend to earn more revenues. I therefore thank you. I believe the lesson will assist you while you are preparing for your upcoming examination. Thank you.